Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again, and boy, have I got a tale that'll echo in your nightmares tonight. The Ozarks, 6,000 known caves carved through ancient limestone. Passages that twist and drop and narrow until you're crawling on your belly through spaces that feel like the mountain's throat swallowing you down. Most of those caves, unmapped, unexplored. And some of them have things living in the deepest chambers that remember what the world was like before humans ever walked upright. Wayne Falstaff and his friends have been caving together for 5 years. They think they know what they're doing. They think experience equals safety. Tonight, 70 feet underground in a system that's not on any map, they're about to learn the difference between echoes and the things that make them. This is your late night creature feature. When the stone speaks your name, it's already too late. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Walking through the woods? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's talk about what lives in the deep. The deep echoing. Chapter 1. The Descent. Wayne Falstaff wasn't running from anything. That's what he told himself as the Ozarks rose out of the morning haze like dark sleeping backs rising from deep water. He rolled the window down. Wet leaves and limestone. The smell hit him clean and sharp, like the preface to something deserved. The divorce papers were folded in the glove compartment, still warm in his mind. He'd promised himself he wouldn't think about them on this trip, wouldn't think about the last argument, about the way it had ended with his wife's voice going flat as a countertop when she said, "You always need somewhere else to be." Somewhere else was easy if you chased it hard enough. Somewhere else was always underground. His duffel rattled on the passenger seat, 2 headlamps, 1 spare battery pack, harness, carabiners, knee pads, a coil of rope that had seen better days. He'd meant to replace the rope, meant to check the hydration bladder for leaks, meant to do a lot of things in the weeks since the split, but he'd been busy keeping the walls of his apartment from closing in. The trip would fix the rest. That was a thought he wore like a charm. The town they'd picked as a rendezvous, Hart's Mill, looked like someone's memory of a place. Single blinking stoplight. A diner where the pie looked better than it was. Gas station with a faded sign warning about sinkholes. Population maybe 300 on a good day. The kind of town that existed because it had always existed, not because anyone had a good reason to build it. Wayne parked beside a pickup whose hood was patched with primer and a white sedan so immaculate it reflected the clouds. Early November and the trees were mostly bare. The ones that held leaves held them like grudges. Tight, brown, unwilling to let go even when the wind insisted. Cliff Smith was already outside the diner, coffee in a paper cup, checking a list on his phone. Cliff wore checklists like other people wore cologne, comfort in the systematic, in the planned. And knowing exactly what came next, he looked up and grinned, that grin of a man who liked being where he said he would be. "Falstaff," he said, "you made good time." "Light traffic," Wayne lied. Truth was he'd driven too fast and too loose the last 100 miles, 80 in a 65 zone, passing on blind curves. Like he could outrun what was chasing him if he just pushed the accelerator hard enough. He clapped Cliff on the shoulder. "You look like you packed a whole REI in the trunk." "Ease of mind weighs nothing," Cliff said. "And batteries weigh." "A little." "Batteries are for quitters." Wayne regretted how sharp it sounded. Tried again. "We'll be fine. You seen Tim yet?" Cliff's grin softened into something careful. "Not yet. He said he'd be here by 10. Wayne checked his watch. 9:43. He looked past Cliff to the diner doorway. Inside he could see the waitress moving between tables, refilling coffee. The mechanical rhythm of small-town morning service. The bell on the glass door jangled and out came Tim Williams. Sunglasses on even though the day was overcast. Guitar case bumped against his knee. He was thinner than last year, as if in some private contest with himself. The grief hung on him like an oversized jacket he couldn't take off. His daughter had been 6 when the car accident happened. Emma. She'd loved butterflies and the color purple and making her father sing songs he'd written before she was born. That was 3 years ago now. Tim's wife had left him a year after. Said she couldn't watch him disappear into himself. Couldn't compete with a ghost. "Gentlemen," Tim said, with a theatrical bow that didn't quite land. "Did you miss me? Or were the echoes sufficient company?" Cliff laughed and Wayne pulled Tim into a hug that Tim tolerated with a shy groan. He smelled like coffee and cut limes, like he'd slept in the booth and the waitresses had been spiking his refills with sympathy. "You eat?" Wayne asked. "Pie," Tim said, was adequate. Coffee was not, but I compensated by having 4. He grinned, but the grin didn't reach more than halfway up his face. The parts of Tim that used to smile all the way through were locked in a car on a rainy Tuesday 3 years back. "How's married life, Wayne?" "Over," Wayne said, flat as he could make it, then tried to buoy it with a shrug. "How's the career?" "Also over," Tim said. "Label dropped me, said my new stuff was too introspective for the current market, which is code for depressing, which is code for honest." He laughed at that. A brittle sound that broke cleanly and fell between them like dropped glass. Cliff watched the exchange with a small, worried crease in his brow, then smoothed it away like a wrinkle in a bedspread. "Well," he said, "we're all disasters. At least we're consistent." They loaded their gear while the clouds pressed lower, cupping the green hills like hands around a candle. Cliff had packed dry sacks, first aid kit the size of a hardcover book, backup of backups for lights. A printed topo map slipped inside a sealed bag because he didn't trust phones underground. Tim had a more modest set: helmet, lamp, gloves. The compact recorder he used to hum song lines into when they came to him. Wayne clocked that, filed it as something that would either be a good omen or a problem when batteries ran low. On the way out of town, they stopped at the gas station to grab extra water and a handful of granola bars that tasted faintly of cardboard and cinnamon. The man behind the counter eyed their gear with a squint that creased all the way past his ears, deep-set eyes, skin like old leather, the kind of face that came from 60 years of Ozark summers and skepticism. "You boys going into the limestone?" he asked. He had a name tag that read MR. Jelly, like a joke you weren't sure you wanted, explained. "We've got a system picked out," Cliff said. "Always the diplomat. Always the one who explained things. Permission and everything. We're experienced." Mr. Jelly rubbed his jaw, the sound of stubble against calloused palm dry as sandpaper. "People get turned around down there. You know the thing about sound in caves?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Ain't faithful. Echoes come back wrong. Sometimes they come back early. Sometimes they come back with a word you didn't say." Tim's mouth did that little sideways twist it did when he was about to make a joke. "We're actors," he said. "We can improvise." Mr. Jelly didn't smile. His eyes had the flat, dark quality of river stones, smooth from years of water wearing them down. "I'm telling you, you'll hear things." "The park boys say it's odd geometry. Pockets in the rock that bounce sound funny. But me, I say the stone keeps memory the way water does. Holds on to it. When folks ain't meant to be where they are, the stone tries to warn them." He paused, fingers drumming the counter in a rhythm that felt deliberate. "You listen to what the stone says. Don't argue with it." Wayne thanked him and paid. $16 and change. Nothing to do with someone's superstition, but fold it and tuck it in your pockets like a receipt you'd throw away later. Outside, Tim let out a low whistle. "Local color," he said, but there was something careful under it, like a man testing ice before stepping onto a frozen pond. Cliff looked back at the station, at Mr. Jelly watching them through the window, then at Wayne. "We stick to the plan." "We always do," Wayne said, and because he wanted to believe that, he believed it. They took the county road out past barns tatty as old quilts. past fields scrolled with hay bales that looked like punctuation marks on empty sentences. The pocked asphalt gave way to gravel and then to dirt. The sky wrung out a brief cold rain that left the leaves shining like freshly washed glass. A hawk glided across their windshield like a warning drawn in the air and disappeared behind a ridge. The directions Wayne had pulled from a caving forum were good enough to get them to an unmarked turnout, the kind that made you feel like you were trespassing on the forest's private time. A place that didn't want to be found but couldn't quite hide itself completely. They parked and shouldered gear. The woods here breathed a different temperature, 2 degrees cooler than the field they'd just left, the way churches are always cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. As if sanctioned by their own weather, the chorus of insects folded up as they moved under the trees. The ground went springy with leaf litter. The limestone underfoot was pocked and fluted like old bone, worn smooth in places where water had kissed it for centuries. They'd been doing this for 5 years, annual tradition, started as a bucket list thing and turned into ritual. There had been the lava tube in New Mexico where Wayne had tripped and bloodied his chin and laughed through the pain while Cliff taped him up. There had been the sea cave in Oregon where the tide chased them out like a dog nipping heels. There had been a gypsum cavern in South Dakota that glittered like a chandelier fallen to its knees. The stories made them sound like men who knew what they were doing. Wayne liked to think they were. The trick with a ritual is you start to confuse it with a guarantee. Entrance should be east of here, Cliff said, consulting the map and the GPS Wayne had brought and charged, but not updated. 15-minute hike, tops. Tim fell into step beside Wayne and hummed under his breath, that habit he had when anxiety needed something to hold. Wayne recognized the tune before he recognized why he recognized it. It was a lullaby. The one Tim's daughter used to make him sing at bedtime, back when she was small enough to believe her father could keep the monsters away. His chest tightened. He glanced at Tim, who stared straight ahead as if pretending he wasn't doing it. "You sure you're good?" Wayne asked quietly. "Yep," Tim said, brightly, too brightly, like stage lights turned up to hide the cracks. "I'm fine. It's quieter in caves. I need quiet." "It's not quiet in caves," Cliff said from ahead, not unkindly. "There's always water somewhere. You just have to listen for it." They broke the tree line at a low swell of rock that looked like a sleeping animal had thrust its rib cage up through the soil. The entrance was a narrow mouth beneath a slab of limestone, slick with damp. Someone had left a rusted anchor bolt hammered into the rock above, a nylon loop that Wayne didn't trust simply by looking at it. He tugged the loop anyway. Felt it give a little, like a tooth that wasn't ready to come free. "This is it," Cliff said. He crouched, put his head near the opening, listened. After a moment he straightened, air moving. That's good. Means a through passage. Might be small for the first 30, 40 feet. Tim squatted beside him. The cave's breath came cold and even, like something alive asleep in there. It smelled of wet stone and mineral decay. That ancient odor of water working through limestone for millennia, dissolving and reforming, patient as death. He hummed again. This time the note rolled into the opening and came back sharpened and late, as if it had caught on the rock and torn. They were quiet then, without meaning to be. "Gear check," Cliff said, as much to break the unease as to do the thing itself. He had a laminated card in his pocket with bullet points on it, began to run through them out loud. Helmets, lamps, spares, belay devices, gloves, knee pads, food, water, first aid. They each touched items as he spoke, made the ritual tactile. Wayne's spares weren't what they should be, but he had enough. Enough was a word that kept trying to mean more than it did. "You brought the new rope?" Cliff asked him. "Yep," Wayne said, looped it from his bag. It wasn't new. It was the not quite new one, the one he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. He watched Cliff's eyes flick across it and then away, polite enough not to comment. Tim straightened, dusted his knees, looked at the hole again. The space was barely a person across. No swagger in sliding through something like that. 5th year, he said. Hell of an anniversary. We're old hands, Wayne said. We're older, Tim said. Wind tugged at the trees and the sound of the leaves layered over the sound from the hole in a way that made Wayne feel momentarily dizzy, as if the forest and the cave were arguing over which one got to own the silence. He blinked. A scrap of blue plastic caught his eye just inside the entrance, the torn corner of a candy wrapper, cemented by damp to the rock. Not bone, not blood, evidence of another person's hunger. They took a quick lunch perched on their heels, jerky that tasted like salt and smoke, the cinnamon cardboard bars. Sips of water that always tasted like something other than water when you made yourself notice it. Tim told a story about a director who'd wanted him to act more like sand and wouldn't clarify what that meant. Cliff told one about his boss trying to schedule a meeting on Sunday and him politely setting fire to the calendar invite. Wayne told the story about the Oregon sea cave and left out the part where he'd been the one to insist they push their luck. When you retell the story of yourself enough times, you swap the negatives like camera lenses and pick the one that flatters. He knew that. It didn't stop him. The rain started again, a fine silver sift that made the rock glisten. The cave exhaled that cold, steady breath, drawing moisture from the air and pulling it inward. Cliff stood and clapped the dust off his hands. We should get in before the rock gets slicker. We stay shallow this first leg. Mark the junctions. If we don't like what we see, we back out and reassess. Copy, Tim said. Little mock salute. Wayne clicked on his headlamp. The beam cut a white cone into the blackness, illuminating nothing but more blackness beyond. He dropped to his knees, then to his belly, and wormed forward. The stone was cold against his chest even through his jacket. Not winter cold, but the deep cold that comes from absence of sun, the cold that's been there since before humans walked upright. It smelled like iron and wet dogs and something faintly sweet, like rotting wood mixed with minerals. His helmet scraped the ceiling. Grit rained into his collar. He tasted dust and limestone, chalky and bitter on his tongue. Behind him he heard Cliff's breath coming steady and controlled. Then Tim's, shorter, faster, the breathing of a man convincing himself this was fine. The passage opened after 20 feet into a low chamber where they could crouch but not stand. Their light swept across flowstone that looked like frozen waterfalls, across formations that jutted like teeth. The air was thicker here, heavy with moisture. Wayne's breath came out in visible puffs, each exhalation hanging in the lamplight before dissipating. Beautiful, Cliff murmured, running a gloved hand along a column. The stone was wet beneath his touch, weeping constantly, always in motion even when it looked still. The formations were delicate, straws hanging from the ceiling, some as thin as pencils, others thick as fingers, centuries of slow accretion, mineral-laden water dripping, building up molecule by molecule. Wayne had read somewhere that some formations grew at a rate of 1 cubic inch per century. The math of that was staggering. The column Cliff was touching could be 10,000 years old, 20,000, older than civilization, older than agriculture, built drop by patient drop while humans were still figuring out fire. They moved deeper. The passage narrowed, widened, twisted like an intestine. They marked junctions with reflective tape, bright orange strips that would catch their lights on the way back. If there was a way back. Wayne pushed the thought away. There was always a way back. That was the rule. 30 minutes in, the character of the cave changed. The formations grew sparse. The walls became smooth, almost polished, as if worn by something other than water. The temperature dropped another few degrees, enough that Wayne's fingers began to ache inside his gloves. "You feel that?" Tim asked, his voice tight. "Temperature shift," Cliff said. "Means we're getting into a larger system. Air is moving differently." But it wasn't just temperature. There was a quality to the air now, a thickness that made Wayne's lungs work harder. It smelled different too, not just minerals and damp, something organic. Something that had been alive and wasn't anymore. Or something that was alive and shouldn't be. They crawled through a squeeze that forced Wayne to exhale completely to fit, his ribs compressing, his lungs burning for air he couldn't take in. For 5 terrible seconds he was wedged. Unable to move forward or back, the stone pressed on him from all sides like the earth itself was trying to swallow him. Then something gave his jacket, his body, the rock, and he spilled through into a chamber tall enough to stand. His lamp swept upward. The ceiling vanished into darkness. Stalactites hung like daggers, dripping steadily, each drop echoing in the vastness. The sound was maddening. Drip, drip, drip. A metronome counting seconds that felt like they shouldn't be counted, that should be left alone. Jesus, Tim breathed, emerging behind him. How far down are we? Maybe 80 feet from entrance, Cliff said, checking his compass and notebook. But depth isn't always vertical in these systems. Could be we're lateral more than down. Wayne's light caught something on the far wall. Scratches, deep gouges in the limestone, running parallel. 4 or 5 of them together, like claw marks, but limestone was soft. You could scratch it with a fingernail. These were deep, enthusiastic, as if whatever made them had been trying to dig through to the other side. Probably a bear, Cliff said, seeing where Wayne was looking. They den in caves sometimes. Yeah, Wayne said. But bears didn't leave marks like that. Bears left marks you could explain. They pushed on, descending a slope of breakdown, chunks of ceiling that had collapsed centuries ago, creating a tumbled ramp into deeper chambers. The rocks shifted under their boots, grinding and clicking. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing back from walls they couldn't see, creating the impression of movement in the periphery. Tim started humming again, that same lullaby. Wayne almost asked him to stop, then didn't, because if humming kept Tim together, then humming was fine. They all had their ways of dealing with the dark. The passage opened into another chamber, this one smaller, more intimate. Wayne's light swept across the floor and stopped. Bones. Not 1 or 2, dozens of them, scattered across the floor like someone had dumped a bucket of pickup sticks. Ribs, vertebrae, long bones that could have been deer or maybe something larger. Skulls, definitely deer, but also raccoon, possum, and one that might have been coyote. All of them old, yellowed, some crumbling to powder. Animal den, Cliff said, crouching to examine a femur. Something's been bringing kills down here. What brings kills into a cave? Tim asked. His voice had gone thin. Lots of things, Cliff said. Bobcats, coyotes, even owls will cache food in protected spaces. But owls didn't go this deep, and bobcats didn't leave claw marks like the ones they'd seen. Wayne's light moved across the bones, counting, cataloging. There were too many. This wasn't a den, this was a dump, a place where things that fed brought what they killed to consume in private. His light stopped on something that made his stomach drop. A boot. Leather, rotted, half dissolved by moisture and time, but unmistakably a boot, human-sized. The sole was still visible, treads worn smooth. Next to it, partly buried in flowstone, was a femur too straight, too long, to be anything but human. Guys, Wayne said, his voice barely above a whisper. They saw it. For a long moment nobody spoke. Old, Cliff said finally. Could be from the 50s, 60s. People used to cave without any safety gear. Accidents happened. Should we? Tim started. We mark it, Cliff said. Report it when we get out, but we don't touch it. That's protocol. Wayne's light drifted across the rest of the chamber. More bones. And now that he was looking, now that he knew what to look for, he could see them. Another boot. a length of rope so old it had fossilized into the stone, scraps of fabric that might have been clothing, and something else. A helmet, dented and cracked, lying on its side near the far wall. The lamp attached to it was missing. Wayne felt his mouth go dry, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, tasting of copper and fear. The air in the chamber felt heavier suddenly, pressing down, as if the mountain itself was leaning in to listen. "We should go back," Tim said. His voice cracked. "We should." A sound cut him off, distant, echoing, impossible to place. It could have been water dripping. It could have been stone settling. It could have been something moving in the dark, testing the air, catching their scent. It could have been all of those things at once. Cliff's hand went to his radio, a useless gesture. They were too deep for signals, too deep for anything but the sound of their own breathing and the mountain breathing back. "We marked this location," Cliff said, his voice steady but tighter than before. "We keep moving. There's another exit listed on the map about half a mile in. We loop through, come out the back way, report this to the rangers. That's the play." "The play is we leave," Tim said. "The play is we go back the way we came." "Through that squeeze?" Wayne said. "In a panic? That's how people get stuck. That's how people die." Tim's laugh was high and brittle. "As opposed to staying here, with whoever the fuck these people were?" "They're old," Cliff repeated. "This happened a long time ago." "Then why do I feel like we're being watched?" Tim asked. Nobody answered, because they all felt it. That pressure on the back of the neck, that certainty that something in the darkness had turned its attention toward them and found them interesting. Wayne's light swept the chamber one more time. The bones seemed to have multiplied, spreading across the floor like a garden growing in fast forward, but that was just fear playing tricks. Bones didn't move. Bones just laid there and waited to be found. Except one of the skulls, a deer skull, antlers still attached, was facing them. Wayne was sure it had been facing the other way a moment ago. Sure enough that his breath caught in his throat. "Cliff," he said. "I see it." "What?" Tim's voice went up an octave. "See what?" Then they all heard it, not the distant sound from before. Something closer, a scraping, like something being dragged across stone, slow, deliberate, getting closer. "Move," Cliff said. "Now." They ran. Chapter 2, The Fall. The passage beyond the bone chamber narrowed fast, forcing them to scramble on hands and knees, headlamps bobbing wildly, throwing shadows that twisted and lunged. Wayne's breath came in ragged gasps, fogging in the frigid air. Behind them that scraping sound continued, steady as a heartbeat, never hurrying, never stopping. There, Cliff's light found an opening, a vertical shaft dropping into darkness. Old climbing hardware was still bolted into the wall, rusted but intact. A single rope hung down, disappearing into the black below. "That's not on the map," Wayne said, his chest heaving. "Don't care," Cliff said. "We're going down." He tested the anchor bolts, gave them each a hard yank. They held. The rope was newer than the hardware, which meant someone had been here recently. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. "Tim first," Cliff said. "I'll belay. Wayne, you watch our backs." Tim stared at the pit, his face pale in the lamplight, eyes too wide. "How far down?" "Can't tell. 30 feet? 40? Cliff clipped a carabiner to Tim's harness, looped the rope through. "You've done this before. Just lean back and walk it." "I don't like this," Tim said. His hands were shaking as he clipped in. "None of us do," Wayne said. He turned his light back down the passage they'd come from. The scraping had stopped. The silence was worse. Tim positioned himself at the edge of the pit, rope taut, Cliff feeding slack. For a moment he just stood there, staring down into the nothing. Then he leaned back, weight on the rope, and begin to descend. Wayne watched him disappear, inch by inch, the circle of his headlamp shrinking as he went down. 10 feet, 20. The beam of light grew distant, diffuse, barely aglow. "How's the rope?" Cliff called down. "Good," Tim's voice echoed strangely, bouncing off walls Wayne couldn't see. "I'm maybe halfway." The snap was like a gunshot in the confined space. The rope jerked in Cliff's hands, going suddenly slack. For one frozen instant, Wayne didn't understand what had happened. His brain refused to process the physics of what slack rope meant when someone was dangling in the dark. Then he heard it. Tim's scream. Raw and animal, Dopplering down into the void like a siren fading into distance. The sound stretched and warped as he fell, warped by the Doppler effect, warped by terror, warped by the certainty of what was coming. The impact came 3 seconds later, long enough for Tim to know, to understand, to experience every millisecond of the fall. The sound was wrong, not a single thud but a cascade of impacts, body hitting an outcropping, spinning, smashing against the shaft wall, tumbling, hitting again. Bones breaking with sounds like green wood snapping, and finally the terminal impact at the bottom. Wet, heavy, the percussion of meat and bone compressed beyond their tolerances. "Tim!" Cliff lunged for the edge. Wayne grabbed him, hauled him back. "Don't, you'll fall." They both leaned over the edge, light stabbing down into darkness that seemed to resist illumination, that seemed to swallow their beams and give back only the faintest suggestion of depth. The shaft went deeper than 40 feet, much deeper, 70, 80, maybe more. At the bottom, barely visible in the weak wash of their lights, Wayne could see a jumble of breakdown and flowstone rendered in blacks and grays. And red, fresh red, spreading. Something was moving down there, weakly, a shape trying to roll over, limbs moving with the disconnected quality of a puppet whose strings were cut. "Tim!" Cliff screamed, his voice cracking, echoing down and coming back emptier. "Tim, can you hear me?" For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of water dripping somewhere in the shaft, each drop a countdown to nothing. Then a groan drifted up, wet, bubbling. The sound of a man whose chest cavity was filling with blood. "Can't." The word came out mangled, consonants slurred. "Can't move my." Wayne's light found him properly now. Tim was on his back, one leg bent at an angle, legs don't bend, folded under him like origami attempted by cruel hands. His left arm was flung out at his side. Wrist shattered, bone fragments visible through torn skin. But it was his back, the way he was lying so flat, so perfectly still from the waist down. That told Wayne everything. "Hurts," Tim managed. The word came out with a spray of dark liquid that looked black in the lamplight. "Everything hurts. But I can't. Can't feel his legs. Can't feel anything below his shattered spine." Wayne had taken enough first aid courses to know what a severed spinal cord meant, what it looked like when vertebrae compressed on impact, when the delicate neural tissue inside was crushed, when the information highway between brain and body was cut permanently. "Tim, we're coming." Cliff was already pulling rope from his pack, hand shaking so badly he could barely tie knots. "Just hold on. We're going to get you out. You're going to be fine." But Tim wasn't fine. Even from 70 feet up, Wayne could see it, could see the angle of Tim's neck, too far forward, suggesting cervical damage, could see the way his chest was moving. Too fast, too shallow, the breathing of a man whose diaphragm wasn't getting proper signals, whose autonomic systems were starting to fail. Could see the blood pooling underneath him, spreading across the flowstone in a dark halo that grew and grew and grew. Tim's voice had changed, gotten quieter, more distant, not from the height but from something internal. Some light starting to dim, something down here. Wayne's blood froze. His light swept the bottom of the shaft more carefully, looking past Tim's broken body to the shadows beyond. The breakdown pile continued past where Tim had landed, tumbling into what looked like another passage. And in that passage, barely visible at the edge of his lamplight, something pale was moving. Wayne's mind raced, cataloging options that all led nowhere good. The rope had snapped, old anchor probably, or a frayed section they'd missed. They had more rope, but not enough. Not for 70 feet, and even if they got down, getting back up with an injured man. "We have to try," Cliff said, already digging in his pack. "We can tie ropes together, anchor them better. I'll go down, assess him. Will." "Cliff," Wayne grabbed his arm. "Listen." From the passage behind them, that scraping sound had started again, closer now, and underneath it, something else. A sound like breathing, or maybe like stone shifting. Or maybe like dozens of things moving in unison, feeling their way through the dark. "I can't leave him," Cliff said. His voice broke. "I can't." "I know." Below, Tim was trying to speak. His words came out wrong, like his mouth wasn't working right. Like his jaw or his tongue or both had been damaged in the fall. "My back.k.feel. Please." Wayne felt his throat close. He'd done enough first aid to know what that meant. Spinal damage, maybe paralysis, maybe worse. They needed a rescue team, proper equipment, a medical evacuation. They needed all the things they didn't have and couldn't get. "Tim, we're coming," Cliff shouted down. He turned to Wayne. "Tie the ropes. All of them. I don't care if it's not rated for this. I don't care if—" "Cliff, look." Wayne's light had found something on the wall of the shaft. More scratches, deep gouges running vertical, as if something had climbed up from below. Or down from above. The marks were fresh, stone dust still visible in the cuts. From the pit, Tim's paralyzed body lay on the flowstone like a sacrifice on an altar, and the pale things approached with the patience of monks at prayer. The first one reached him while Cliff was still 20 feet up the rope. While Wayne was still screaming for him to climb faster, it moved with liquid grace. Limbs folding and unfolding in ways that suggested too many joints, or joints that worked on different principles than human ones. Its head, that flat, wide skull with eyes placed too far apart, tilted as it studied Tim's broken body. Tim saw it. His eyes widened, pupils blown huge with shock and terror and the massive doses of adrenaline his dying body was pumping through his system in a last desperate bid for survival. His mouth opened. He tried to scream. What came out was a wheeze, the sound of air moving through a throat full of blood, through lungs that were filling with fluid from internal bleeding, through a chest cavity where broken ribs had punctured tissue and organs were beginning to fail. The creature opened its mouth, that impossibly wide mouth that split its face nearly to its ears, and smiled. Then it lowered its head to Tim's exposed throat. The first bite took his larynx. Teeth designed for tearing punched through skin and muscle and cartilage with surgical precision. Tim's eyes went impossibly wider. His mouth worked, trying to form words. Trying to scream, but the equipment for screaming was gone. Ripped out, blood sprayed in arterial pulses, hot and red, painting the pale creature's face, its chest, the stone beneath them. The creature's throat worked, swallowing, then it bent down for another bite. This one took muscle from Tim's shoulder. The meat came away with a sound like Velcro separating. Tim's arm flopped uselessly, no longer connected to the muscles that moved it. A piece of meat attached by skin and bone alone. And Tim felt all of it, every nerve ending firing, every pain receptor screaming. The spinal injury had taken his ability to move, but not his ability to feel. He was trapped in his body, forced to experience his own consumption, his own transformation from person to food. More pale shapes emerged from the passage. 3, 4, 6 of them, drawn by the smell of fresh blood, by the sound of feeding, by whatever senses they possessed that told them prey was available and helpless. They fell on Tim like sharks in a feeding frenzy. One took his left hand, biting through the wrist with a crunch of small bones compressing. It worried at the appendage like a dog with a chew toy, shaking its head back and forth until tendons snapped and the hand came free. Another creature found his abdomen, its claws punctured through his shirt, through skin, through the thin layer of muscle. It pulled, opening him, spilling intestines onto the flowstone in glistening coils that steamed in the cold air. The smell was indescribable, the contents of a ruptured bowel mixed with blood and bile. The creature didn't care. It buried its face in Tim's abdominal cavity, teeth tearing at his liver, at his stomach. Tim's eyes were still open, still aware. His mouth moved soundlessly, lips forming words no one would ever hear. Please, stop, help, God, no. The creatures didn't care about words. They cared about sustenance, about feeding, about warm meat that was better fresh. A creature took his face, teeth closed on his cheek, tore it away, exposing molars in the bone beneath. Another took his ear, bit it off with a twist, the cartilage crunched between its teeth. And through it all, Tim's eyes stayed open, stayed conscious, watched the ceiling of the cave recede as blood loss finally began to shut down his brain, watched the pale shapes blur as his vision failed. His last thought wasn't a thought at all, but a sensation, the feeling of being opened, of being consumed, of being transformed from a man into protein for things that lived in darkness. Then the light went out, inside and out, and Tim Williams was gone. Wayne watched from the edge, couldn't look away, couldn't close his eyes, could only bear witness to his friend's death, to his consumption, to his transformation into food for things that shouldn't exist. Then, from the pile of feeding creatures, one of them looked up. Its eyes found Wayne's lamplight. It opened its mouth and made a sound using Cliff's voice, Cliff's exact voice, tone and timbre and accent perfect, as if it had learned him in the eating. Wayne, help me, Wayne. Wayne's hands made the decision before his brain did. He let go of the rope, stepped back from the edge. His light swept down one last time, caught the pale shapes scattering from their feast, caught the gleam of bones already picked clean. Then he ran. The passage spat him out into a gallery, a massive chamber with a ceiling that disappeared into blackness, formations everywhere, columns thicker than his body, stalactites hanging like chandeliers, flowstone cascading down walls and frozen waterfalls. His lamp couldn't find the far side. The space was too big, too empty, too wrong, and not empty. His light swept across the floor and caught more bones, not scattered like in the first chamber, arranged, sorted by type, femurs in one pile, ribs in another, skulls lined up in neat rows. Dozens of skulls, maybe hundreds. Human skulls. Some old, yellowed and cracked, some newer, still showing tissue, hair clinging to scalps, and one fresh enough that Wayne could see the face, mouth frozen open, eyes still wide with whatever horror they'd seen last. The skull was wearing a headlamp. The lamp was off, but the strap was new, REI brand. The same brand Wayne had in his pack. His bladder let go, warmth spread down his leg, steaming in the cold air. He didn't notice, couldn't notice, could only stare at the arrangement of death spread before him like an offering, like a warning, like a promise of what waited for him. Movement in his peripheral vision. He spun, light catching a pale blur retreating up the wall, then another, and another. They clung to the stone like spiders, arms and legs bent at angles that hurt to look at, bodies thin and elongated, ribs visible through translucent skin. Their heads were wrong, too flat, too wide, with mouths that split their faces nearly in half. One of them opened its mouth and spoke with Tim's voice. "Wayne, help me. I can't feel my legs." Another used Cliff's voice. "Where are you going? Don't leave us." A third used a voice Wayne didn't recognize. Older, rougher. Been waiting so long, so hungry, so long. They were descending now, flowing down the walls like water, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The walls were moving with them, pale bodies on pale stone, distinguishable only by the wet gleam of skin and eyes that reflected his lamplight. Wayne's mind fractured. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. People didn't get eaten by cave monsters. That was stories. That was movies. That was... One dropped from the ceiling and landed 5 feet in front of him. Up close it was worse. The skin wasn't skin at all. It was something between flesh and fungus, mottled and damp, growing in patches over muscle and bone. Its fingers were too long, jointed 3 times instead of 2, ending in black nails worn to points. The smell coming off it was indescribable. Rot and wet earth and something chemical, like ammonia mixed with spoiled meat. It tilted its head, studying him. Its mouth opened. Cliff's voice came out. "Going to hurt so much. Going to take so long. You'll see them while they eat you. You'll see it all." Wayne's paralysis broke. He grabbed the largest rock within reach, a chunk of breakdown the size of his fist, and swung it with everything he had. The rock caught the creature across its temple with a crack like a baseball bat on a watermelon. The head snapped sideways, too far. Way too far. The neck bending in a direction necks didn't bend. Black fluid spurted from the wound, spattering Wayne's jacket. His face. It smelled like battery acid and tasted like metal when drops hit his lips. The creature didn't fall. It turned its broken head back toward him, neck bones grinding audibly, and smiled with too many teeth. Then the walls came alive. They poured down from every direction. 20, 30, more than Wayne could count. He ran, boots slipping on bones, on flowstone, on his own piss. His lamp cast wild shadows that became monsters, that were monsters, that had always been monsters waiting in the dark for idiots like him to crawl into their larder. A passage opened to his left, narrow, barely wide enough. He dove for it, scraped through, felt claws rake his calf, tearing through fabric and skin. Hot blood ran into his boot. He kicked backward, connecting with something soft. It made a sound like a punctured tire. The passage twisted. He followed it blindly, no thought except forward, except away, except anything but back. His lamp flickered, battery dying. Wonderful. Perfect. Exactly what he needed. He slapped it, and the light stabilized. The walls were closing in. He was crawling now, belly dragging through spaces that got tighter with every foot. His pack caught on an outcropping. He shrugged out of it, left it behind, kept moving. His helmet caught next. He ripped it off, taking hair with it, felt scalp tear. Didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the faint draft he could feel on his face. The hint of moving air that meant an exit, meant surface, meant life. Behind him, the scraping sound followed, patient, unhurried, the sound of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to go. The passage opened suddenly, spitting him out into a smaller chamber. His light swept across formations, across more bones, across. A way up. A chimney, barely visible, cutting through the ceiling, natural handholds where water had carved pockets in the stone, 50 feet, maybe 60, vertical. His shoulders were screaming. His legs rubber, his hands cut and bleeding, but it didn't matter. He began to climb. 10 feet, 20. The handholds were slick with moisture, with his own blood. His fingers kept slipping. He jammed his fist into a crack, used the friction to hold himself, reached for the next hold. His right boot skidded off a nub of limestone. For a sickening moment he hung by one hand, swinging, legs kicking air. He caught himself, pulled up, kept climbing. Below, pale shapes were gathering, looking up at him, waiting. One of them began to climb, then another. They moved like insects, adhering to the stone with no apparent effort, ascending in silence. Wayne climbed faster, fear giving his exhausted muscles impossible strength. The chimney narrowed. He wedged himself between the walls, used the compression to climb, back pressed against one side, boots against the other, inching upward. His spine felt like it was being ground to powder, but he climbed. 40 feet, 50. Light. Real light, natural light, gray and weak, and the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The chimney widened into a crack barely 2 feet across. He could see sky, trees, the sound of wind and leaves like the voice of God himself welcoming him back to the world of the living. Wayne shoved himself through, ribs screaming, skin tearing on jagged rock, his shoulders wedged. He exhaled completely, made himself smaller, pushed. Something gave. His jacket, his skin. A rib, maybe, and he slid through. He tumbled onto moss and mud and leaves. Real leaves. Surface leaves. The smell of them decay and life mixed together. The smell of a world where sun touched things and made them grow hit him like a drug. He gasped, choking on air that tasted like freedom, like survival, like victory. He'd made it. He'd actually made it. Wayne rolled onto his back, staring up at pale gray sky filtering through bare branches. Rain was starting again, cold drops hitting his face, washing away the blood and cave dust and tears he didn't remember crying. His chest heaved, his whole body shook with exhaustion and shock and the adrenaline crash that came after. They were dead. Tim and Cliff were dead, eaten by things that shouldn't exist, in a cave that would never give them back. He'd have to tell their families. He'd have to explain. A sound behind him made his blood freeze. Wayne forced himself to roll over, to look back at the crack he'd emerged from. Something pale was wedged in the opening, watching him, its head tilted slowly, almost curiously. Then it smiled. That too wide smile that split its face nearly in half. It spoke with his own voice. Thought you made it. Thought you were safe. The creature's hand reached through the crack. Too many fingers. Too many joints. Then another hand. It was pulling itself through, body compressing, bones bending in ways bones shouldn't bend. Wayne tried to scramble backward. His boot caught on something. A root. A stone. A fucking branch. It didn't matter. He went down hard, back slamming against the base of a tree. The impact drove the air from his lungs. The creature emerged fully, unfolding to its full height. 7 feet, maybe 8. In the gray daylight it was worse than in the darkness, the translucent skin showing organs pulsing underneath. The fungal growths spreading across its body, the mouth that hung open showing row after row of teeth. It moved toward him, not fast. There was no need for speed. It had already won. Wayne's hand closed on a rock. Not a big one, not enough, but it was all he had. "Come on," he whispered. His voice cracked. "Come on, you fucker." The creature tilted its head again, that curious gesture. Then it lunged. Wayne swung the rock with everything he had left. Every ounce of strength, every bit of rage, every second of his life that he wanted back. The rock caught the creature's skull with a wet crunch. Black ichor sprayed, hot and stinking. The creature stumbled, but didn't fall. It recovered, shook its head like a dog shaking off water, and lunged again. This time Wayne couldn't move fast enough. Hands clamped onto his shoulders, his chest, cold, wet, too strong. The mouth opened impossibly wide, jaw unhinging like a snake's. The teeth descended toward his throat. Wayne felt them pierce his skin, felt them punch through muscle and cartilage, felt the hot gush of his own blood sheeting down his chest, soaking his shirt. Steaming in the cold air, he tried to scream, but his vocal cords were severed, flopping uselessly in his throat. The sound that came out was a wet wheeze, a death rattle. The teeth sawed deeper, cutting through tissue, scraping against vertebrae. He could feel everything, every severed nerve, every torn vessel. His vision dimmed at the edges, red turning to gray. His arms flailed weakly, hands beating against the creature's chest like birds beating against a window. The creature pulled its head back, taking a piece of Wayne with it. Meat tore with a sound like wet fabric ripping. Blood sprayed in an arc, painting the leaves, the moss, the pale skin. Wayne's body convulsed, his legs kicked out, heels digging furrows in the mud. His hands found the creature's face, tried to push it away, but his fingers just slid off the slick skin, leaving trails in the fungal growth. The creature bit down again. This time it found his shoulder, teeth punching through collarbone with a crack like breaking ice. The bone splintered, sharp fragments driven into the soft tissue beneath. Wayne's right arm went dead, nerves severed, muscles destroyed. He was dying. He knew it with absolute certainty. Could feel his blood pressure dropping, feel his brain starving for oxygen. The pain was enormous, beyond anything he'd thought possible. But it was also getting distant, his body's last mercy, shutting down the receptors that screamed what was happening. The creature worried at him like a dog with a toy, shaking its head back and forth, tearing larger pieces free. Wayne's vision tunneled, gray turned to black. The last thing he saw was more pale shapes emerging from the crack, drawn by the smell of blood, coming to feed. The last thing he heard was the forest going silent, birds stopping their chatter, wind dying to nothing. Even the rain seemed to pause. The mountain was listening. The mountain was satisfied. Wayne's body spasmed once more, then went still. His eyes stared at nothing, seeing the sky but not seeing it, seeing what lay beyond and finding it empty, cold, and utterly indifferent to his passing. The creatures fed for hours, stripping meat from bone with methodical efficiency. When they were done, they dragged what remained back into the crack, back underground, back to the bone field where they arranged their trophies. Epilogue 1 week later. A hunter moved through the Ozark woods at dawn, rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes scanning for deer sign. The air was cool, damp with mist that clung to the hollows like smoke. He'd been walking these woods for 40 years, knew every trail and creek, every good stand and hidden clearing. This clearing he didn't recognize. It was small, unremarkable except for the disturbed earth near an outcropping of limestone. Something had been digging, or something had been dug up. The leaves were scattered, moss torn, revealing dark soil underneath. His boot caught on something. He looked down and saw a hand. Human, male, the skin gray and waxy, pulled tight over the bones, fingers curled in a final spasm, nails torn off, the beds black with dried blood. The hand emerged from the ground as if reaching up, as if even in death trying to claw its way back to the surface. The hunter stepped back, fumbling for his phone. His hands shook as he dialed 911, gave his location, tried to describe what he was seeing without vomiting. While he waited for the sheriff, he made the mistake of looking closer. The hand wasn't alone. There were other things in the disturbed earth. A boot, rotted, scraps of fabric that might have been a jacket, and bones, so many bones, human and animal mixed together, all showing the same marks. Deep gouges, as if gnawed by teeth. Behind him, from the crack in the limestone, came a sound. It could have been wind moving through stone. It could have been water finding new channels. It could have been the mountain settling, adjusting itself, making room for new additions to its collection. Or it could have been something else, something patient, something hungry, something that had learned, over centuries of waiting in the dark, that humans always came back, always pushed deeper, always convinced themselves they were safe. The hunter didn't turn around. He stood frozen, phone to his ear, listening to the dispatcher's voice ask questions he couldn't answer. His eyes were locked on the crack in the stone, on the darkness beyond, on the pale shape that might have been visible if you looked long enough, if you were brave enough, if you were foolish enough. The sheriff's office found 3 bodies over the next 2 days. Wayne Falstaff, identified by dental records. Timothy Williams, found 70 feet down a vertical shaft with a broken back and evidence of significant trauma to the throat and chest. Clifford Smith, found near Williams. Cause of death listed as massive tissue damage consistent with animal predation. The cave system was declared off-limits. Signs were posted. The entrance was sealed with a steel gate and warning placards. The reports filed by the medical examiner noted several anomalies: bite marks that didn't match any known animal, claw marks that suggested multiple attackers working in concert, and the condition of the bodies: partially consumed, then apparently abandoned, as if whatever killed them had been disturbed mid-meal, or as if whatever killed them was simply saving them for later. The ranger who filed the final report included a note about the bone field discovered in the main chamber, over 200 individual skeletons, some dating back more than a century. Evidence suggested the site had been in continuous use as a feeding ground for an extended period. The note also mentioned the sounds reported by the recovery team, voices calling from deeper in the cave system, using the names of the deceased. Echoes, the report concluded, acoustic anomalies common in limestone formations. The report did not mention what one of the recovery team members swore he saw: pale shapes moving in the darkness beyond his lamplight, keeping pace with the team as they extracted the bodies, following them all the way back to the entrance, watching, learning, waiting for the gate to rust, for the warning signs to fade, for the next group of explorers to decide that rules didn't apply to them, that they were different, that they would be safe. The mountain was patient. The mountain always won. And in the deepest chambers, where no light had ever reached, where the stone breathed its cold exhalations and the water dripped its eternal metronome, the pale things waited. They had time. They had all the time in the world. Folklore note: the Ozarks contain over 6,000 known caves. New systems are discovered every year. The Cherokee and Osage peoples who lived in these mountains for thousands of years have stories about things that dwelled in the earth before humans, things that remember the old world, things that hunger for what was lost. They called them the Pale Walkers, the Stone Eaters, the things that learn your voice. The elders taught their children which caves to avoid, which passages led to the feeding grounds, which sounds in the dark meant turn back now, before it's too late. They understood something the settlers who came later forgo to Euro: some places aren't meant for us. Some darkness isn't meant to be explored. The old warnings spoke of creatures that lived in the deepest passages, blind things that had adapted to eternal night, things that could hear a heartbeat from 100 yards away, that could smell fear like blood and water, that could learn your voice by tasting your flesh. The warning said these creatures were patient, that they didn't hunt like animals a Euro, quick and brutal and over. They hunted like the stone itself, slow, methodical, inevitable. They could wait weeks for prey to wander into their territory, could follow at a distance for hours, learning, listening, memorizing the voices of the doomed. And when they finally fed, they did it in stages, taking the weakest first, the injured, the ones who fell behind, using the voices of the dead to call the living deeper, to lure them into the bone fields where generations of their kind had fed. The Osage had a name for the sound the creatures made when they spoke with stolen voices. They called it the echo that hunts, because it wasn't really an echo, it was something else. Something that had learned to mimic human speech by consuming human throats, by tasting the vibrations in severed vocal cords, by remembering the last words screaming men said before the teeth found them. Most caves in the Ozarks are unmapped, most passages remain unexplored. And in those deep places, where the weight of the mountain presses down and the darkness is absolute, there are sounds that can't be explained by geology. Sounds that echo back wrong. Sounds that learn your voice so they can call you deeper. Mr. Jelly was right. The stone keeps memory. When folks ain't meant to be where they are, the stone tries to warn them. Maybe we should listen. Maybe we should stay in the light. And maybe we should understand that some hungers are older than we can imagine, patient enough to wait for us to come to them. The caves are still there, still breathing, still waiting. Don't answer when they call. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrific tale from the vault. Oh, poor Wayne. So brave, so stupid. Thought 5 years of experience would keep him safe. Thought he knew the difference between echoes and mimicry. But some things down in the dark have been practicing voices for centuries, been learning how to call you deeper, how to use your friend's screams to lure you into the feeding grounds. And Wayne? He got to hear every word, got to watch Tim and Cliff get torn apart, got to run and climb and think he'd made it to the surface, only to find out the pale things don't stop at cave entrances. They follow, they adapt, they learn just how we love it. If this story crawled under your skin the right way, hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every day at 8 p.m. Central, and trust me, tomorrow's even nastier. Leave a like if you're never going caving again, and drop a comment where are you watching from. What's the deepest you've ever been underground? Ever heard something down there that didn't sound quite right? I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Remember when you hear your name called in the darkness, and you know you're alone. Don't answer, because whatever's calling already knows you're there. It's just being polite before it feeds. Until next time, kiddies, keep your fires burning and your eyes on the trees. This has been your late night creature feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo, and the stone is always listening.